What's up, amigos? It's the Prodigy Maker Show, episode 83. And this is a sports science review. So, for all of you who love sports science, exercise science, and applied exercise science to tennis, this is for you. I've been trying to incorporate more of these shows on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy them if you have a scientific bent. But today's podcast is about ergogenic aids and nutritional supplements in professional tennis players, and I have a research review of a journal article from 2017, and I'll show you the link to the article here, the DOI, in case you guys want to search it online. Very easy to find. The title of the article is Use of Nutritional Supplements and Ergogenic Aids in Professional Tennis Players, and it's an interesting study. The authors, the lead author is Alvaro Lopez Samanes. Sorry if I butchered your name, buddy. And Mark Kovacs is also a co-author on this study. But there apparently are very few studies on nutrition specific to high-performance tennis players or tennis players in general. And this was a questionnaire that the authors sent to 71 professional tennis players, although there's some caveats. I'll talk to you about how the study was performed, the methodology. There's some few flaws, or at least a few caveats to take note of. But essentially, here it says 81 total athletes. So 81 total athletes, but in here it says 71. So that must be a typo in the actual text itself. There's 81 on the abstract and 71 in the actual methodology section of the research. So, okay, well, let's say 71. All right, that's a little concerning. Anyway, they sent out a questionnaire, or they had the athletes fill out a questionnaire asking them about the supplements they used, the nutritional supplements they used, and any ergogenic aids they used. So right off the bat, you have a question of, it's a questionnaire. How are the players going to be honest? Are they going to be forthright? Are they going to reveal everything they're taking? That is a big question, especially with tennis players, especially concerning how under the microscope tennis players are these days for the supplements that they're taking, and whether they're taking any illegal supplements and things like that. Performance enhancing aids, performance enhancing drug use is a big topic on the Pro Tour right now. So just methodologically, I'm concerned that some of the athletes may not have been honest, and that's always a question when you're dealing with questionnaires and asking for athletes to reveal what they're doing. Sometimes they don't remember correctly, so there can be inaccuracies there. There can be a lack of validity and potentially reliability there. And you have the question of whether the athletes are actually honest or not. But let's say we have 71 pro athletes. 9 of the athletes were female and 62 were male. And what's interesting is, for some reason, this would have been a great study if they had got more players in the top 100, because the authors compare the nutritional supplements used and ergogenic aids used for top 100 players versus outside the top 100 players. That's a big part of the review. And in this case, they only had 8 players out of the 71. 5 males and 3 female players were within the top 100 worldwide. And the rest of the players were outside the top 100, anywhere from 300 to 2,000. They did the study at 2 ITF 10K events, so I'm assuming the bulk of the players were lower ranked players. You had to have at least 1 ATP point to be included in the study. So they set up a table at 2 10Ks, and they 2 10Ks, it says. One men's futures and 1 women's futures. They were both 10Ks apparently, and they got 52 of the professional players from those futures. So obviously the bulk of the players were lower ranked, in a 10K. And then they got 11 players by telephone and 9 through email. So I'm assuming they got some of those top 100 players by phone or email interviews and questionnaires. They took the players' height and weight, and they measured their body fat. But I don't know how reliable it is. They used just a bioimpedance analysis device for body composition. So I'm not sure how accurate that is. In the methodology section, I will tell you it's interesting. They found that the players on average trained 15 plus or minus 3.3 hours a week, 15.5 plus or minus 3.3 hours a week for the top 100 players, and about the same for the players outside the top 100, which was 14.8 plus or minus 5.9 hours per week. So about 15 to 20 or 10, basically 10, what we would assume, 15 hours a week, 10 to 20 hours a week for the top players. But there was a significant difference in the amount of physical conditioning done per week. The lower ranked players trained 6.5 plus or minus 3.3 hours per week, so between 3 and 9, more or less. And the top 100 players, they only had 8 of them, unfortunately. It would have been great to have a lot more in this study. Of the top 100 players, caveat, 8, they trained 11 plus or minus 2 hours per week off the court, physical conditioning. So significant difference in this was not even highlighted in the study, but it caught my eye. The top 100 players said that they trained more off court, significantly more. 11 hours per week plus or minus 2.0, or compared to 6.5 hours per week plus or minus 3.3. Anyway, they all had an ATP ranking, so at least 1 point, but that could give you a pretty low ranking in the, closer to 2,000 in the world. And we don't know how many players were actually closer to, 200 or 300 in the world, but that's not given in the study. The authors they give an interesting clinical scenario, and they talk about how nutritional supplementation, ergogenic aids have become very, very important for all athletes and in all professional sports because of the competition and also the need to recover better. And they highlighted that for tennis players, recovery is huge. And tennis players have this grueling schedule, more so than most professional athletes. And they noted that they travel to play more than 25 tournaments per year. They travel across multiple different time zones. And they sometimes have to play 2 matches or more per day. It's possible. So the recovery demands for the tennis athlete, the professional tennis athlete, are huge. And so any benefit that pro athletes in tennis can get in terms of recovery are really, really important. And so we've seen a rise in the use of nutritional supplements on the pro tour and ergogenic aids. And as you know from the last sports science or tennis sports science review that I did for you guys in the previous podcast, I talked about recovery, and I reviewed an article by Mark Kovacs where he emphasized the same trend, that recovery is huge and it's starting to be studied a lot more, particularly in regards to tennis and pro tennis, because recovery seems to be what's separating the elite players from the sub-elite. And if you're a parent or if you're a coach and you like this podcast and you follow this channel, I think that's an area where you can really level up your player's game, whether you have a student or a son or daughter. If you can help them with their recovery and use evidence, use research to elevate your recovery protocols, you can really have an advantage over all the other junior players out there, whatever level player your kid or student is. You can really have a significant advantage. So this is important to be aware of the latest cutting edge science and the latest research concerning recovery. That could be nutritionally, that could be in terms of hydrotherapy, which we talked about in the previous podcast. That could be compression technologies like compression wear. That could be different electrostim technologies, different types of hydrotherapies, hot and cold, and massage, all sorts of modalities that can help recovery, speed recovery, and improve performance that we really should be using with our junior players or whatever level players we have to help them compete and win and also train harder. After all, that's our goal in high performance, is to develop our players to the maximum. So recovery is this, I just try to put a spotlight on recovery and how important it is, and all the research and a lot of scientists are stressing that recovery is this huge sort of untapped area to focus on, and it's very, very important to do so. So I would highlight that for you guys too, if you're following my podcast. The researchers talk about how it's interesting that creatine, sodium bicarbonate, and caffeine have been demonstrated to enhance sports performance, but not necessarily so in tennis. The researchers noted that there are studies that support, I'll go into this in a moment, but they mentioned that there are some studies that support the use of caffeine, but the ones that have studied creatine are less, it's less clear. And in fact, several studies, according to this article, have shown that creatine did not have a substantial increase or increase in performance, or like serve accuracy, for example, or other performance metrics like power, or I believe another one was sprint performance. I'll go into that in detail in a moment. But essentially, the research is showing a positive for caffeine, and I can talk to you about the actual dosages that the athletes are taking, and a big question mark about creatine, although creatine is extensively studied for other sports and has been shown to be a powerful ergogenic aid in other sports, but not necessarily so, according to the research, in tennis. So we talked about the experimental design, the questionnaire, the potential methodological flaws. Let's talk about some of the results. I think you may find this interesting. Unfortunately, again, there was a very small sample size of top 100 players, so I don't really like how the authors generalized the results. Like if you read the abstract, the authors compare the outside the top 100 with the top 100 players, and they make some conclusions about the differences in supplementation and use of ergogenic aids, but it's quite clear that that's a huge flaw in the study. And if I recall, they don't point that out. Usually at the end of studies, it's common practice to point out potential methodological flaws or potential basically problems that may arise in the methodology or in the way the study was performed, drawbacks basically. That's pretty standard practice in research writing, and that was not included in this study. I think it should have, because that's a huge red flag for me. They only had 8 players in the top 100, and they're comparing those 8 players to 63 players outside the top 100, and then they're drawing conclusions about the nutritional supplementation use and the ergogenic aid use difference. So if you can accept that major drawback of the study, I mean, there are some interesting conclusions. One is that 81% of pro tennis players take at least one nutritional supplement or ergogenic aid. That actually is a little surprising to me. I would say probably it should be 100%, because nutritional supplements include like a sports energy drink like Gatorade, like Powerade, things like that, a carbohydrate drink. And I would assume that almost all pro tennis players take some. They don't just drink water, right, at every event. So that's actually a little surprising in that bigger macro number. They concluded that, let's see, outside the top 100 participants showed lower frequencies of use for protein, so like protein shakes or protein and carbohydrate shake, like basically like a meal replacement shake, and lower use or frequency of use of minerals. Particularly iron was one in question. I can talk to you about that. In comparison to outside the top 100 participants, the top 100 participants showed higher use of iron, creatine, caffeine, and meal supplementation like protein and carbohydrate mix. But that's, again, a potential flaw in the study, because they went on to say that in terms of iron, which 5 out of the top 8 players in the top 100, so over 60% used iron, but then they mentioned that 4 of them had an iron deficiency, so they were taking iron because a doctor or a nutritionist had determined that they were low on iron. It was like almost it was basically a medical condition. And so I don't know how that should be explained. They mention it, but they still, the headline reading is that more top 100 players take iron supplements than outside the top 100. But obviously, it was a very small sample, and 4 out of the 5 of them had a prescription for iron based on a deficiency. So I don't know how you can make that bold headline conclusion, at least responsibly, that way. The reasons that the athletes took nutritional supplements and ergogenic aids is interesting. They typically reported they wanted to recover better and they wanted higher energy levels. So we would all assume they wanted higher energy levels, but the recovery, again, to stress that, is key. It's going to be key for juniors if you're a parent or coach, and it's going to be key if you're a higher level athlete. Recover, recover, recovery. Use science, use technology, use all of the advancements in nutrition and legal performance enhancement that you can to aid your recovery, and that'll give you much better results. The authors stressed, and they noted that for the players outside the top 100, these are the lower ranked guys on the ITF circuit and playing futures and challengers, about 10% of them said they took the nutritional supplements to enhance body image, aesthetic reasons, whereas none of the players in the top 100 did that. And the authors they did highlight that was an interesting result, that there may have been different motivations for the lower ranked players than the top 100 players. But again, it was a very small sample size for the top 100 players. I mean, if they had 50 or 60 top 100 players, would have been like incredible. This report, it must have been very hard to get anyone to answer. That's what I'm assuming. It must have been really hard to get anyone to agree to participate, especially the top guys. And they had very few females too, so that's another caveat that I didn't mention. A major potential problem in the methodology is that they had very few females. How many females did they have? I think 9. They had only 9 females. So this is primarily a study of male players outside the top 100. So just keep that in mind. That is a real drawback as well, a weakness of the study. I think humble researchers should always have that section in their research. They should always have the potential flaws in their data. It shows humility, and it also shows an attention to detail and being able to look at your own research and to be able to show other researchers or other people who have interest where your conclusions may or may not be wrong. I think that's responsible science. Anyway, if you're interested in the percentages, even though the sample size is small, in terms of sports drinks, 7 out of 8 top 100 players used a sports drink. I can't believe there's one top 100 player who only drinks water, apparently. And 51 out of 63 outside the top 100 players used a sports drink. What do you guys think about that? I'm shocked, actually, by that. In terms of a carbohydrate protein mix, 5 out of the 8 top 100 players used basically a meal replacement shake or nutritional shake, and only 14% of the OT 100 outside the top 100 players. So significantly more of the top 100 players used the meal replacement shake. And that is interesting. The iron I mentioned, the authors talk about iron. 5 out of 8, the top 100 players used iron. but 4 of them had a prescription for it, for a deficiency. So I don't know how you can draw any clear conclusion from that. And only 4 out of the top of the 63 outside the top 100 use iron. In terms of a vitamin mineral, like a multivitamin, 4 out of 8 top 100 players used a multivitamin, okay, 50%. And 18 out of the 63 outside the top 100 used a multivitamin. Only 18 out of 63, 27%. That is a bit surprising. You would think they would all be supplementing with a vitamin, mineral, just to cover their bases nutritionally. Caffeine is the big one that I want to talk about. Caffeine, 4 out of 8 top 100 players use caffeine, 50%. Significant, even though it's a small sample. And 7 out of 63 of the outside the top 100. So only 11% of the outside the top 100, but 50% of the top 100. That is an interesting stat, right? Protein shakes says only protein shakes, 2 out of 8. 2 out of 8, 25%, 2 out of the top 100 players, and 25%, 25 out of 63 outside the top 100. So this is just a protein shake, just a protein recovery shake, not a meal replacement. And about 40% of the outside the top 100 players and 25% of the top 100. So, the players are taking a protein shake, they're taking a meal replacement. Hard to draw a conclusion about iron. Caffeine is a very interesting one. And I'm surprised that there are any top professional tennis players, considering the demands of heat in many parts of the world, that are not taking a sports drink, carbohydrate and sodium replenishment sports drink. That is shocking to me, just because we know from the evidence that a carbohydrate and sodium replenishment drink is vital to preventing cramping and restoring hydration in the body. So anyway, that's an aside. So in terms of, let's talk about the caffeine uses, because that I think is the most interesting. The authors discuss caffeine in the discussion section of the research of the journal article. Caffeine, it has some very positive research. You want to know the dosage? Very important, especially if you're considering using caffeine yourself as a player, or if you have players who you might want to advise to use caffeine. It has been very well studied. The authors note an early study by Graham and co-workers revealed that doses between 3 and 6 milligrams per kilogram. So 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram. So I am 183 pounds. I come out to about 83 kilograms or 185 pounds. I'm anywhere between, my weight fluctuates between 80, 83, 84 kigs. Let's say 80 kilograms to just for rough numbers to estimate easily. So for me, they're saying that the performance dosage that I could take to play tennis at, I'm over 180 to 185 pounds, let's say 80 kilograms, is 3 times 80, 240 milligrams to 480 milligrams. So about 250 milligrams to 500 milligrams of caffeine would give me a performance edge. And I'll go into that a little further in a minute. So a typical cup of coffee is, I believe, 200 milligrams for a strong cup of coffee. So that would be the equivalent for me. If you say 150 to 200 milligrams per cup of coffee, I would have to take 2 or 3 cups of coffee, strong coffee, to get some of these advantages. So that's interesting. I think if I did that, I would feel very anxious, and I think my heart rate and blood pressure would be significantly higher, which I'm not sure I would want to do. So that's something you have to balance. You want some of the benefits of caffeine, but maybe you don't want to have some of the side effects of caffeine either, the physiological side effects. And so that is a real legitimate concern if you're thinking about using caffeine. So the study says that measuring contraction velocity during resistance exercise caffeine can improve the contraction velocity when performing a muscular action, and it also can improve the neuromuscular performance. The authors note that a number of studies using GPS tracking have shown that caffeine could increase the number of high-speed actions during intermittent sports, for example, soccer. The results could be interesting from the tennis perspective, since tennis is characterized by high intermittent bouts of effort. Tennis is basically a series of short intermittent sprints followed by periods of recovery. And so the authors are saying that caffeine could help with, theoretically, could certainly help with this type of movement pattern and improving the performance. And we know that caffeine can increase the contraction velocity of muscles and potentially the increase in neuromuscular performance of muscles. So the evidence about the benefits of caffeine in tennis performance are building, the authors say. Since the time of day, the morning shows a detrimental effect on some features related with tennis performance. So there's been some recent studies on that tennis players can sometimes perform poorly in the morning, and caffeine could help mitigate this or ameliorate this morning effect. Some studies have reported several benefits, including increased hand grip force, which would be applicable to tennis, running pace at high intensity, and number of sprints during a simulated match with caffeine ingestion. But other studies have not reported any benefit on performance. So the authors are saying there's likely a benefit. We know some of the mechanisms that caffeine could benefit tennis, but there is also some mixed research out there on caffeine usage. In terms of creatine, we know that creatine is being used, but the authors stress that there are no current studies, and this is a 2017 article. So according to the author's review, of the literature, they say that creatine has been proven effective in many other sports. For example, in cyclical and intermittent sports, it's a very useful ergogenic aid to enhance sports performance. But several authors have not found evidence. They have not found evidence of tennis performance improvement after creatine use. So that is a big question mark about creatine, which is a very, very popularly studied ergogenic aid, and it's been shown to be very safe. All of my readings of the literature have pointed to that, and the studies that I've seen, especially in the short term, maybe not so much in the long term, but the authors are saying that there are no studies that show an improvement in tennis players. For example, one study, 4 doses, 5 grams of creatine. I'm not sure what that means in relation to body weight. I don't know. You have to make sure the dosing is correct too. That would be important to know within the study itself. We were talking about methodological issues. So after taking the creatine, it's a double-blind crossover study, after comparing serve accuracy and running velocity on a 70-meter shuttle run test. Not sure why they use 70 meters to test tennis players, because tennis players never run 70 meters, but that's what they did. They did not find any differences between the creatine and placebo. Okay? Another study confirmed the same findings in a randomized double-blind study. They provided a creatine loading dose of, here we go, 0.3 grams per kilogram body weight. 0.3 grams per kilogram was the dosing, and a maintenance dose of 0.03 grams per kilogram. So it sounds like they did a better job of loading the creatine in this study. And they used a specific tennis test battery. The test included serve velocity. This seems to me a much better study. Serve velocity, muscular strength. This study was by Plume et al. The test includes serve velocity, muscular strength, intermittent running speed, pre and post intervention. So you would think that the creatine would help serve velocity. That would be a simple way to see some of the benefits. And it did not. It did not improve any of the variables measured. So the authors conclude that as of 2017, there are a significant number of tennis players taking creatine, but we don't have any hard evidence about the efficacy to improve tennis performance, which is an interesting conclusion. And I'd be interested to see if there are any further studies between 2017 and now that can clarify or help us, answer this question about creatine use and specifically tennis players. So just to summarize, that this study has some interesting observations about tennis players using nutritional supplements and ergogenic aids. Big highlight of caffeine as a potential ergogenic aid, performance enhancer. Looks like it definitely is. I would still caution you to consider safety if you're thinking about caffeine use for your players, especially if you're concerned about cardiac issues. If you have any players with heart problems, I would be very wary of caffeine use. There is interesting questions about creatine. The big question marks about does creatine help tennis players perform better? Tennis is an intermittent sprint sport with recovery periods. Tennis is both anaerobic and aerobic. And so does creatine actually give an advantage to tennis players? Could there be any disadvantages to creatine use? We don't have clear evidence about iron because I think the way the study, the sample was just too small, and half the sample we're taking iron for deficiency. So I don't know if you can draw any conclusions about iron. It seems like a number of professional players are taking either a meal replacement shake or a protein shake. I mean, that makes total sense to me. I don't even need a study to tell me that. I'm sure top athletes are doing that. I'm surprised if it's true that there is a proportion of pro athletes who only drink water. Okay, that would be very surprising indeed. One final conclusion that the authors thought was interesting was that of the elite players in the top 100, they tended to get most of their advice from nutritionists, a sports nutritionist. They asked the players where they got their nutrition advice from and their advice for taking ergogenic aids. And the top 100 players were more likely to use like a specific sports nutritionist, and the players outside the top 100, presumably because they didn't have the resources, oftentimes just they asked like I believe a coach or a strength coach. They didn't have professional nutrition advice. So that is definitely an advantage for the top 100 players. So guys, I hope you found this research review interesting. I'm trying to share science, basically scientific studies that relate to tennis that could help a parent or a coach, or if you're a player watching. I know there's still also players who watch the podcast and enjoy things that are interesting from a scientific point of view. I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in biomechanics research. I do have an interest in ergogenic aids and nutrition. Anything with exercise physiology and tennis players. I just think there's nothing really like that that I've seen on YouTube. And sometimes it can be kind of a bore to wade through the research just reading an article. And this is a way that you could enhance your sports science knowledge relating to tennis. And you could just listen to it in the car or when you're working out, or you could watch the show and get a nice review of tennis sports science without having to actually do the hard work of sifting through a potentially dense article. So I hope you guys enjoy. I will be mixing in some more tennis sports science reviews in the future podcasts. And I hope some of the information here helps you, maybe helps guide you in terms of supplementation and making decisions about developing high performance players and athletes. All right, guys, I hope you enjoy. God bless, and I'll see you on the next program.